Uhuru, welcome to the breakdown, being brought to you by the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, a mass organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. The breakdown is a news, analysis, and opinion program, as well as a platform for highlighting guests whose issues spotlight the international plight of colonized women struggling against colonialism. My name is Koko Lewis. I will be your MC for today's broadcast. Today's breakdown, we will be discussing the politics of claiming our African identity. It's more than just a superficial claim for some Black people to be genetically proven that we are African. Still, there's discourse. Some people say Africans born in America or any place outside of Africa aren't African. We become something else, Black, African, hyphenated, African descended, or other. We plan to dive into the politics of this from an African internationalist perspective and bring in other perspectives as well. First, I want to thank everyone who has made it possible for us to complete phase one of the African Liberation Center project, which was to replace the roof. Because of your donations, we were able to finish our roof. Here's a video of the update.
The African National Women's Organization Liberation Center is an ambitious initiative born from the vision to transform.
Hello, it's Yejide, and we're here at the Animal Liberation Center. Not much has changed except we have a new roof. So we don't no longer can have like any water or other elements coming in, and we are on to our next stages of operation, which is to fix up the inside and clear some things out, take down some walls. But we just wanted to thank you all for donating to this project and allowing us to put on a new roof to the Animal Liberation Center, which allows us to start the real work. So thank you so much.
There are fresh wood pieces here that were placed in the roof. You can see it more over here. It's all new wood in the roof. So we're grateful to finally get that done and have that replaced. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now we are raising funds to start phase two, which will be working with on the interior of the building. Our goal today is to raise $250. If you have it, go ahead and and put in the comments now. You got the $250, so we can go ahead and check that off. No, just kidding. You don't have to wait until the end of our program. Donate anytime at anwouhuru.org/donate or use the QR code on the screen. Now, did you miss our last two streams? We had the breakdown, anti-colonial free speech of the trial of speech. I'm sorry, anti-colonial free speech trial of the Uhuru 3 interview with Penny Hess, and then African women's struggle for economic determination and justice on September 1st, when our guest was Deborah Carvalho from Brazil, Shayla Silva, and Naomi Woods Adams, who was from Ghana. You can watch them anytime on ANWO's Facebook and YouTube channels. If you enjoy our content, be sure to like, comment, and follow us on our platforms. Our ANWO YouTube is young, so we are asking folks to head over to our channel, subscribe so that we can make it to 500 subscribers. We are streaming live on YouTube channels, Burning Spear TV, and the African National Women's Organization's page on Facebook. I'm excited about today's discussion. Uhuru welcomed President Yejide, and if Comrade Jay, if you're able to get your mic together, go ahead and join us as well as we go ahead and get into this discussion. Uhuru. Are you there?
Comrades, I fixed it. I got it. We're comrades. This is Yejide. And this is a really important discussion because I'm, as comrades who are under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, who belong to an organization called the African National Women's Organization. And many of our members are not born on the continent of Africa. We sometimes get some pushback or some struggles around identifying as African. And we wanted to open up the discussion, not just because we are part of political organizations that represent the interests of Black people, but because we believe that the whole question of Africa and claiming our African identity is really important to the unification of Africa and African people, and the responsibility that we have to fight not only for Black lives and Black things and all these other kinds of things, but to really call to question what does liberation look like, right? Because if we say we Black, we trying to get free and free Black people where? Where is our national homeland? Most people do have a national homeland, right? Where is our national homeland? There's no Black national homeland. And so what that really leaves us to fall on is that we just gonna stay where we are. And that may be true for a lot of people, but we are approaching this from an African internationalist perspective. And I wanted to share something before we got started with the conversation around it's a piece that was shared with here we go. It's a piece that was shared by with our comrades who registered for the program. There's a link that was sent to everybody, and it was in reference to African internationalism, this question and the statement that we have around African national identity. And I'm going to show it now, right? Oh, that's not the best one. So let me just move it over. It says, it's from the African nation defined, and this is how the African People's Socialist Party defines the African nation, right? The African nation is a community of people whose core identity is based on historical ties to the equatorial continent of Black Africa, contributing to a common culture, history, and physiognomy. The African nation is also, I can't see it because something's blocked here, but it's also something.
I can read it. The African nation is also comprised of all those African people who have been forcibly dispersed to various places in the world through colonial slavery. Dispersed Africans were part of the process of the development of capitalism and the European nation, a process that requires our subjugation and national incoherence. Additionally, the African nation is comprised of many who experience a sense of sameness, a subjective connection to Africa, mainly because of skin color that helps to define their imperialist, inspired, impoverished, and oppressed state of existence. The Dalit of India, the indigenous of Australia, and other areas where the African presence goes back to earliest times, such as the Asian Pacific region, are also included in this category.
Now, that's how the African People's Socialist Party defined the African nation, and not everybody agrees with that. And maybe some of the people who are identified in this statement agrees with that identification of African people. But I just want to say that the purpose of this broadcast is to discuss 2 points, right? There are people like us who say we're African for so many reasons that can be proven, obviously, and and to us is very clear, even if there was no political ideology behind it, I'm African, point blank. But there are other people who may recognize their African ancestry, who now say that they are Black or they're other. And that might be because they think of the Africa question as a national question. Where do I reside? I don't know what that other side is, but I can guess, right? Where do I reside right now, and what culture do I belong to based on where I reside at the moment? So that could mean that I was born and I was raised in the United States, therefore I'm a Black American. I was born and raised in Jamaica, so that makes me a Jamaican. And so, or a Black Jamaican, they don't say Black, Afro-Jamaican. Or somewhere else, right? So these, I can understand that argument, but most times when somebody responds to somebody who might call themselves African, not knowing what this person's background is, right, in terms of how they understand themselves, the idea is like, you are not African, or we are not African, speaking about themselves and the person who might have claimed that they're African. And we're going to go through some screen grabs that I got, which prompted some of this discussion. But I wanted to open it up, and you can always comment and chat and put in your comments and questions as we go along, because we know that this is probably going to be a hot topic, and it always is. But I just wanted to open up with my identity, right? Like, how I came to understand I am African. And I think some of the other comrades might want to share that for themselves. But it was before I came into the Uhuru movement. It was through the process of talking about, I used to be popular on YouTube. I was one of the first African, like, black hair YouTubers on the platform. I don't have that channel anymore. But part of that YouTubing process was learning about what it meant to have black hair, and then it became African hair, because African hair more aptly described the different kinds of hair types that African people have. And then I fell in with the crowd, the black people crowd, the Africans who was studying and talking about Africa and black people, and it became more than just about hair. So it was a challenge for me to dig deeper about who I was. And I also have two parents who are from the Caribbean, right? Who were born in the Caribbean. So there was, I would think, innately an idea about the fact that I'm an African person, because I don't know, because you can see the path of slavery, right? You can see that, I'm a first generation African that was born in the United States from Africans who were born in the Caribbean and were brought there because they were kidnapped from the continent of Africa. So clearly, and then we have my family are all over the world. So I still wasn't there. I was still calling myself a Jug American child. This was before.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, in this process of doing these hair videos and learning more and really finding conversations about what people are, talking about the hair, and in this hair discussion brought out this whole question of Africa and identity and comfortability. And it was in this process that I stopped calling myself a Jug American. I started saying that I'm an African. and I didn't say it in every video. I didn't make no announcement, but I sort of came to the understanding that this hyphenated identity that I was taking on didn't really mean anything, that my real identity was an African person. That doesn't say that I don't say that I'm black. I am, but it became more important to me to identify that and I didn't say it as that, but these colonial borders for me were the definition of who I am. And that also, I think one more thing is that also that in recognizing and in going, I think the thing that sealed the deal for me is when I went home to Grenada and for a funeral, or for what they call a fete. A fete is something that happens a few years after a person dies. You go home, you have a party, so to speak, and you have libations, you have food, and you walk through the home of the parents of the person who had passed, and you light candles and you do all these things. And it's basically an African tradition. And so I started looking up, like, how does this relate to other things that happen in the world? And, you start to see the relationships of what African culture and African tradition permeates in different cultures, even though we are hundreds of years, some of us here are hundreds of years, outside of the continent of Africa. So we haven't stopped being African by virtue of just moving somewhere, that we've kept that. And I've talked a lot, but I just wanted to open up with those few things and allow my comrades to talk. And then we're going to get into some deeper conversations. Uhuru.
I can jump
I'm gonna
in.
let Jay go.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
good. Sorry, sorry jumping in late. My sound was really bad, so I just took off my headphones so I could be heard. But a lot of what you're saying yesterday, like, resonated with me. I mean, not in terms of having the National Hair Channel. I wish I could have that. But one thing I think is interesting to think about is there's two different ways to think of, like, African and Black identity. There's this sort of sociological way of understanding it, and then there's sort of like a political identity. And the political identity is more, like, in a way, chosen, in the sense that, like, when I say that I'm African, I mean that I am in solidarity with the people that were either of the continent to this day or stolen from that continent. And it's kind of like, this oppositional identity to colonizers and colonization and imperial interests. And then there's a sociological, which is born a specific way and having specific features. And I think part of why I think of it maybe in a couple different ways is just like how my parents related to their race, maybe because like my dad is very light skinned, like very very light skinned, and he was like very proud to be black. And I saw something on TikTok the other day that was like, no one's as pro black as a light skin that has two black parents, and like that's definitely my dad. And he was always like, yeah, like black power, like out there, and he didn't even really look black, like but my mom was very much visibly black and had black features and was very assimilationist, and it was almost like she was African by accident, African by birth, and maybe she wouldn't have chose that if she had a choice. So having those two different things in the background as I'm being raised, as I grow up, it's these kind of conflicting messages. But in Jamaican mythology, there's so much of our heroes that are so connected and uplifting their blackness. I think about growing up listening to Bob Marley music, and he's singing about stolen from Africa, brought to America, fighting on arrival, fighting for survival, and like listening to that growing up and understanding, Black history as a history of struggle, and I think that's sort of specific to like Black history is specifically a history of struggle in a way that African history is not, because there's a long African history outside of that struggle. And so, when I'm referring to Africanness, I'm often referring to the full length of the historical timeline, most of which is not oppression, most of which is not colonization and imperialism. It's, culture and knowledge, science, wisdom, strength, matriarchal cultures, and all these other things. So I sometimes identify as Black, sometimes identify as an African, Afro-Jamaican, but it also really much depends on my audience, because sometimes people, different. I talk to people in their own language, and if somebody's going to look at me kind of strange because I say African, unless there's a point in me really explaining it, and I'll just Black. But if I do want to explain something, then yeah, maybe I will say like identify as African in this way because etc. But yeah, just my thoughts. I don't know what Koko. I'll pass it to you. What are your thoughts?
All right, Uhuru. So I am from both sides of my family have been in North America for hundreds of years. All the way until I was able to trace my lineage back into chattel slavery. So I know that both of my family parts was brought here from chattel slavery for the most part. So I think that affects the way that, especially Black Americans, that we look at race, because we have always been the minority in this country versus some other diaspora, especially in the Caribbean, where you have as far as population, as African people being the primary. I use the term African most commonly, and like sometimes, like Jay, sometimes it's easier depending on the environment around, typically non-Black environments, to say Black, because I think it's more common or more easily digestible to use the term African around mutual other Africans. So if I'm referring to my family, referring to them as Africans. For me, I grew up a Garveyite, but not even like a Garveyite directly. I grew up a Garveyite due to my grandfather's relationship and participation in the Communist Party. And growing up, the Communist Party wasn't in the community in the 80s and 90s like it was in the 60s and 70s and the 50s. So what I could connect to was Garvey and being a Garveyite and I grew up with this identity of we are all Africans together. I never felt like Black Americans were separate from Caribbean Americans or Caribbean, African Caribbean people or anything like that. I always had this, we are one people. Like my mom always drove into us that we all descended from Africa, no matter how long we have been out of Africa. We still are descendants of people that were stolen from Africa. No matter if we was raped and our lineage is filtered, we're still African people. And so that has just been the way I grew up. I never grew up as until I got around socially. A lot of the times we kids don't understand other aspects of life until they go out into the world and are exposed to other people, because growing up I didn't understand why people didn't have black teachers or African teachers. I didn't understand people who wanted to be not African. And then my interaction with African people, I think just having that perspective, or that upbringing, that when I do meet people from other Africans from the diaspora, it's always a bonding thing. It's never like I look at us being different. It's like, girl, you from Brazil, we black, we do the same thing, because if you look at history, and I like right now I'm into looking at history through diet and lifestyle. We do the same things. We eat the same foods, rice, tomato. I mean, you can go from everywhere that African people are. You kind of see similar diets. You may see more native to the land ingredients.
Tofu,
But
cassava, all that stuff with
come
different
on
versions
now,
of it.
different
I don't know
versions
all
of
the things, but like,
cassava,
listen, that's cornmeal, y'all. Like, and
right?
go ahead, comrade.
Polenta. It's going. You just jump in.
Yes, but I just think
Masa, all of
what
that.
you were saying about because growing up, I grew up as a child, first generation, born here, and not in a time when being from the Caribbean was even seen as cool. Like people would be like, "Ooh, them some
Africans
dirty people. They clean up their butts with their hands." Jamaicans, like that was it. Like this was the. So I learned very early to say what I am and be like, "What?" So when I got to the point where I'm African, I don't like even. I had a conversation. I was in a I wish we could call people in too. I'm seeing some of these comments. I grew
right.
up. I was in the out in Lyft. Lyft is a ride share service for those of you who maybe don't live here. I don't know what Lyft is, but ride share service. And the brother, he was listening to Fali Ipupa. I mean Fali Ipupa. And I was like, "Oh, where you from?" And he was like, he's from Senegal. I thought he was from Congo because, Fali is from Congo. And so he was just like, Fali? I was like, yes. I'm like, Fali is the best. Like, I want to dance like Fali. And so we started to have a conversation about Fali Pupa. And he was just like, where are you from? I said, I was born here. My parents were born in the Caribbean, but I'm an African woman. He didn't, this man who's driving this Lyft was like, you ain't African. He was just like, yes. He said, do you know African history? He's like, let me tell you about, and he said, where have you been in Africa? I said, I've been in Sierra Leone. And he was telling me about the African history of Sierra Leone and Freetown. And he was running it off. But there was, when you, like, so there are people that when you say that you are African, they tell you that the Africans don't even claim us as Africans, that, that they call us, what do they call us? Bruni or something like that, where they call us niggas, and I was just like, we call each other niggas. I don't understand what this contradiction is. Like we call each other niggas. Oh no, they mean like white people. I'm like, do they? Like I don't like. I've never met an African from the continent being in Africa, an African from the continent who, if I said I'm African, they'd be like, no, you ain't. I said met online maybe, but met in person and said that to their
I
face.
totally agree. I feel like the people that are online aren't even for real. Like they're probably FBI agents or something. Because when you go to the motherland, I mean, they tell you things like, or they were telling me, especially, when I was in Ghana, saying things like, when slavery came and we were taken away, it's not just one wound, it's two wounds. It's the wound of the mother and the wound of the child that's stolen away. And, the motherland is the mother that was emptied of its children. And, that's a pain. And if anything, that's almost in a way, like I can imagine a worse pain. You create this life force and it's stolen from you versus when you're a child, you're stolen from somewhere. It's all this is all in a way, all we know. But, I think there's a sense of great loss of like what the continent could have been if we weren't all, stolen away. And that reconnection is so important because, it is we've accomplished so much throughout our history, and we are not at the end of history, regardless of what the neoliberals and the capitalists say. There's this very famous book called The End of History, and the premise was that basically the U.S. won. The U.S. won history. There's no history now. Which is kind of like a little ludicrous. But like it just reminds me, I'm kind of going all over the place, but I was just thinking of a quote by Kwame Nkrumah, and he talks about how he said he's not African because he was born in Africa. He's African because Africa was born in him. And I really like relate to that quote. Like you were saying, the food, the dance, like all of these things are within us. And I remember going to like a Pentecostal church, and my mother's a very Christian woman and believes African spirituality is of the devil, but we were out there doing African spirituality, speaking in tongues and dancing around, and like these ring shouts and all this other stuff. I'm like, this is straight up from Africa. And this disconnect is so wild. But it also reminds me of there's this interesting like TikTok saga, there's a new one every day, where this girl comes online to show her parents, and everyone was like, girl, you're black. And she had these two lily white parents, and they were like, yeah, girl, you're black. And like they were just like raising her as a white girl, but it was very obvious to anybody that could see her. And it's like, that's how our genes are. Like it's not just the genes, it is the music, it is there's so many things that are pulsing through us, like coming through us ancestrally, and you can't hide it. You might want to, but you can't stifle it. It is an expressive, life affirming way of living, and it cannot be denied. And the more people sort of lean into that expression of life force that is Africa, the more liberated I think that we become.
Yeah, and I think once we get to that part where we've accepted our Africanness, it becomes less of a problem, I think, and it helps us connect ourselves more readily to other African people. Because if you take the stance that you are something other than African, then it makes you say that what I've seen, that you are not African, and you can't find similarities with other people and other cultures. And being African, just for people's, is not this one idea of being the continent of Africa. I don't know how many hundreds and thousands of square miles, how many different languages, how many different ethnicities, how many different hair types and phenotypes on the continent of Africa. But this idea that to be African is to look one sort of way and to speak one sort of language, and that there are Africans on the continent of Africa who speak French. It doesn't make them less African. They speak in the colonized language, so we speak English. We just happen to be born in these places. So what the chairman said, and he says it all the times, he said, you don't get on a boat in Africa, and then as an African, and then get off the boat and what in these colonies as something else. You don't, the water didn't wash away your Africanness. You're still an African person. And so I think it's even more important to claim that, not only politically now, because African people are trying, you can see it, the sense of it, are trying to come together. That music is one piece that is happening, but you can find commonalities, the way that we dance, the way that we feed off one another. And not only just us, but the whole world feeds off of African people come out with something, it's took. It's took. You know what I'm saying? Like, but we feed off one another when we see this, and we can see that, even though there's no one phenotype and no one accent or language I can see phenotypically, maybe more than others or less than others, but I can see phenotypically that I'm an African person. And if there was no other way of telling that I am African than to look at myself in the mirror, then here it is. I don't speak any African languages. I tried. I couldn't. I was trying to speak Yoruba. I got a book.
It's not too late.
Know exactly. Do it. I don't know. I only went to Africa once. But like Comrade Jay explained, Kwame Nkrumah says that I'm not African because I was born in Africa. I was African because Africa was born in me. And Africa was born in me in so many different ways because of scientifically, culturally, all these other kinds of ways. Africa was born in me. And so anybody who has the audacity, it's like now you can be a trans person and somebody will not question that. But if you call yourself an African, somebody be up in your face talking about you ain't African. And I was just like, you know, when it's clearly that you are. And that's the same as like, recognizing who you are as a person, like as every other identity. And I think it's problematic that we accept this idea, we accept rejection. If you can claim African, and then you say, I called myself African once, but then an African from the continent told me that I wasn't. So I ain't gonna never call myself African again. This person is 25 years old on the continent, never read a book about African people, never understood the whole question of colonialism. Even if you don't understand the whole question of this is some person behind a camera who's calling you something, even though you understand yourself to be something, to be African, and you allow that. So we can't allow that. We have to claim it and you have to be strong about it. And that's my opinion. Yeah. Would you say, Koko?
Yeah, I want to tag in because a lot of the difference or the reasons why we have these social issues between, continental Africans and the diaspora, it's all the colonial constructs. It's based off the, imperialism and colonialism, far as saying like, oh, you're not see those Africans or those blacks aren't African in the United States because they're not born in Africa. Like all of that is still a colonial construct. I know the blinds are like, sorry y'all, I'm trying to.
I feel you. The sun is
a very sunny day.
The sun is beaming.
Look like a zebra. Gotta pull the blinds up, girl. Here we go.
It's a very sunny day today.
As we can see from Jay's background with this blue sky, yes.
Yes, I know. I'm jealous. That blue sky. But the whole, these are all things that have been fed to our people, saying, from the African in America perspective, we were told that, we were there was always something derogatory being told to us or being taught to us about continental Africans, about Caribbean Africans.
Yes.
We are taught to be, even if you go into the talented 10th was never brought to us.
Same with the talented 10th is for those people who don't know what the talented 10th is.
Right. Talented 10th is that Dubois came up with the talented 10th of like 10% of the African, like what we call the vanguard, but our vanguard is for African people. With the talented 10th was to be the cream of the crop of African people. And even with
financially, educationally, so the talented 10th is the petty bourgeoisie.
Type, the Jack and Jill type,
correct. And even though, like, within that, because I very much grew up in that, under that influence of petty bourgeoisie, the fact that I'm not petty bourgeoisie today mystifies me on a daily basis. A lot of that you're taught that you are better than the diaspora because you're the example of what the diaspora can do. And that there are, because I'm like, oh, I want to do service trips. When I was growing up, I want to do service trips. I wanted to go to Africa. I want to go to Brazil, where I knew all these African people were. I wanted to be a part of that, but I was constantly being held back. Like, no, you have to, you're a Black American. You're not part of the diaspora. Because I'm sitting here pledging my case. I was a little quiet little firecracker, okay? So pleading my case of why I feel like I'm the same as the people that are in the Caribbean. I feel that I'm the same as the people in Brazil. I'm the same as the people in continental Africa. I'm the same as the Africans that are in Europe, because it's I always knew that there was Africans in Europe because I love history, but being constantly told that no, you don't as the talented 10, you don't aspire to go take vacations in Africa or the Caribbean. You're supposed to go to Italy and Paris and even St. Petersburg, Russia, because that's on the top of my bucket list from when I was growing up. But that whole colonial influence of separating your of separation and not acknowledging that you're African. And I'm glad that I had my foundation, which is what my grandfather taught me, is that we're Africans. I'm Africa. I'm an African for Africa. I'm an African for the African diaspora. I'm an African for the people that are in my neighborhood. I'm an African for the people that are in Aboriginal people in Australia that we brought up, the dialect people, like we had to break down these colonial constructs of what being African is, and that we are one people, one nation.
I'm glad you're
not even here.
I'm glad you're bringing it up, because we talk about ourselves culturally, right? Yes, by Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Changed everything for me.
But we talk about being African in terms of affirming our own identity as people who, to be quite honest, have had so many identities, right? We were Negro, then we became Black, and then there's African American that we also do this, and we've been scarred. We now have hyphenations. We're Afro descendants, which is a term I greatly reject. I am an African person. You don't call an African person born on a continent African descendant. I am not a descendant from some far off African. I am an African person still. One of the other arguments too is that that because there was miscegenation that happened here that makes you less African. There's miscegenation that happened on the continent of Africa as well. And I think part of that is also recognizing that we don't see that what has happened to us as African people here or outside of Africa as the same as what happened to African people on the continent of Africa, because it's the same. There was plantations. Africa still was and still is a plantation. I'm gonna call Africa a country. That's controversial, but Africa to me is a country. He's got to unify our country so we can have one Africa.
Continent.
But what happened to us is that we were split up, just like we did everything, like just the whole entire continent is split up. But you raised, comrade, is a political question too. So other than just identity, culture, food, things like that, which I think are really important for really finding commonality amongst African people, is that, politically, what do I claim? When we, in a political organization, and as a Black person, when I talk about freedom and liberation, I'm talking about Africa, because you just can't pick the parts. You can't. Okay, Sudan is experiencing this violence in Congo, and there's no rubber, and coltan is coming out of Congo, and then there's all these other kinds of things that we talk about in reference to the continent of Africa. But then, as an African, what my designation also says is that I'm politically aligning myself with the continent of Africa. Africa is mine, just like every other African, and that I'm going to fight for Africa. I'm going to fight for Africa because there is no Africa plan within the African people. And if African people are saying they're this, that, and the other, I'm African American or I'm Black, I belong here to this colonizer country, or I belong to that colonized country, or this colonized country, these colonized identities, then the power that we have collectively is also divided. I'm saying you can't fight where you are, but I'm also saying that ultimately what we have to do is connect our struggles together as African people from these different places to ultimately struggle for our African homeland to be free. And if we are not doing that, and so it's not just Sudan or Ethiopia or Ethiopia, Congo, Nigeria, it's those places and the whole kit and caboodle. Everything is ours. Everything is ours. We have to fight for it. And so, yeah, that's just it. But the political question for Africa for me is that, I'm an African because Africa is mine. It's my birthright. And I feel 100% like I need to take it back from the colonizers who have claim to every single thing on the continent of Africa, yet our people are not. So I don't care if there's some petty bourgeois Africans who've got money, they live in a good life on the continent of Africa. The majority of African people do not have consistent power throughout the entire country, continent of Africa. Even the most developed places, like, for example, in South Africa, we speak to comrades in South Africa or occupied Azania on a daily week, and we can't even get them on the phone because they have a power surge and they have to get off the phone line. Don't have access to clean and running water or all of these other kinds of things. And that's because the exploiters have taken all of these resources and taken it out of the continent. Have not, the Africans themselves are working for the imperialists, the colonizers, and allowing for these things to happen. So nothing's getting developed on the continent of Africa except in the interest of the colonizer. So if you see a Google lab somewhere, it's the colonizer who wants to find who wants to develop this Google lab, not African. If you see an oil refinery, it's the colonizer who has built and is using that oil refinery for their purposes. But there is nothing on the continent of Africa, nothing on the continent of Africa that is being created for Africa and African people, so that we have ownership. And you know that that's the reason, you know that because there's not one, maybe except for a few that are now emerging, not one revolutionary African leader who is saying, let's unify Africa. Let's use our resources for ourselves. And there may be some exceptions, because I know there's been some developments in Mali and some of these other places, but not one African leader is doing that. And so I know that our resources, every single one of them, is not being used for the benefit of the African continent, African people. So for my identity, recognizing that makes it more urgent and makes it me have more of a responsibility to claim African identity. Yeah. That makes sense.
You mentioned the comprador class in Africa, and it just had me thinking about, looking at the divisions that do exist. Why do these divisions exist? And in the U.S., often we see, folks that are migrating from the motherland, and because they have the resources to migrate, it's sort of self-selecting folks of the comprador class, the collaborators with empire. And so oftentimes people here that are victims of, colonialism in the hoods here are dealing with folks who have immigrated, who are part of the comprador class. And there's that kind of disjoint, that kind of relationship that happens where, someone who migrated from Africa might feel like they're better than U.S. born Africans because of chattel slavery or whatever. And that also has me thinking about how, like, it's interesting to think about it dialectically. I know that's such a buzzword, but like in the sense that, when I was in Africa, I mentioned how they were like, you're a long lost children. We always missed you. You're back home. This is your home. And they were pretty much, at some point or another, and I've heard this from a lot of people, they basically call you white. And they also call their own people white who have Western educations. And it's not a skin thing. It's not a skin color thing. It is a mindset thing. It is, and we absolutely, in a lot of ways, have been colonized in our mindsets, and it's an ongoing effort and battle to be decolonizing our minds, so we're not repeating, imperial talking points and just acting out the empire's wishes without even knowing it. So there's that sense too, where it's like we're African, we'll always be African, and our minds we're always fighting this battle against the whitenings of our minds. And I feel like that's also something to keep in mind. And one other thing I was also thinking about was how I remember in the 90s when African American became very popular, and I also remember, like, a lot of people, like myself, didn't like it that much because the identity of Black was sort of like a Pan-Africanist identity, like Black and proud, like, it was a reaction from the respectability of the 60s, and the Martin Luther King with the button-up whatever, and he's still shot even though he's wearing a suit. And it was sort of more the like kente crowd, like Afro pigs, like, yes, I'm Black and I'm proud, and I appreciate that. And it felt like, the African American term came up in opposition to that. And I always would find white folks that would be like, the way they say it too, they'd be like, the African American gentleman, instead of saying Black, as if they were afraid of the word Black. And the fact that
Mhm.
they were afraid to say it made me appreciate the term more because it
Mhm.
showed to me that it was a
Mhm.
fundamentally political identity in the way that maybe African American is not. And I know that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about us calling ourselves African American. I know that none of us do that. But it's just interesting because to think about like how the term African American came about, how it was in reaction to more Pan Africanist identities, and it was trying to use the terminology of African for like an assimilationist purpose in a way, and so we're seeing the rejection of that now, where people are like, "I'm not American," like me, like I'm like, "Don't call me American, do not you dare," you know,
Still a prisoner of
you
war.
know,
Listen,
Still a
POW.
prisoner of war. Until they return me to
exactly,
my home with reparations.
I
yes,
appreciate that too, because I never really thought about it that way. I mean, I still use the term black. It's interchangeable to me in many ways, but I make it a point of learning about my entire cultures. There's so many cultures of African people. There's so many that I study that, and I think when you learn about other cultures and people learn about your culture, it becomes easier to have conversations about things. So, for example, since my family was immigrated here from the Caribbean, and and there's a lot of other so-called West Indian people who immigrated here. You wouldn't, unless they put on an accent, you wouldn't know that where they come from, and unless I put my accent on, you were like, I've never heard you, you know what I mean? Like, so it's the same thing. Like, you don't know where people are from, and you don't know, where it come from, and even if you like, so without, if we all did not speak a language and we just were in a room together, dancing, eating food, it would be like, oh, look, all these African people, be one and the same. And for me, that's super. I've lived that in my upbringing as a human being, to be cross cultural, to have this Caribbean sort of culture and family accents all around me growing up, and being in that, foods that were different. So people talk about collard greens, and I'm like, I don't know nothing about that. I know about ackee and saltfish, and because that's how I grew up, I ate that. You know what I'm saying? I don't know about collard greens, but it's still greens, y'all. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So like, so I grew up differently, but I still grew up here. And so there's a culture of being, and even in the United States, there's a culture of being Black in
Mhm.
different locations, right? So in the
Correct.
South, it's a different culture, right? In the North, it's a different culture. In the West, in the Midwest, a different culture that develops. Sound, the way we talk to each other, the way that we treat each other are very different, and culture is very fluid. So when people talk about, oh, you don't know this type of religion and you don't know this type of, like, what are you talking about? Like, this stuff is fluid. Nothing stays the same from beginning to time. Culture is a reflection of things that have come into the society that has changed it, and you have worked with it. So it's always a fluid thing. So to say that somebody is this way and this is what African is, and because you don't fall into those parameters that then you yourself are not seen as African, is ridiculous. I also wanted to because one of the reasons why we started this conversation is, number one, I think this is Kwame and Nkrumah's birthday today.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
26.
and
26.
okay, it's coming up. Okay. Well, it's this month, and we wanted to highlight that quote that Comrade Jay put out earlier, which is that I'm African not because I was born in Africa, because Africa was born in me. But there were a few things that we observed on the internet. So I'm going to share one real quick. So
In the
first,
West.
in my business, I follow Amanda Seals, who
Yes.
I think is so, so we all have opinions about Miss Amanda, but I follow her because I think, generally speaking, first of all, first of all, she has a really strong opinion. She was, before the Palestinian uh, uh, uptick happened, she was talking about everything, Black people, all these sort of things. And so, I gravitated toward her, found out that she is Grenadian too, and that, not like that makes a difference, but sometimes you align,
Culturally, that makes a difference.
right? So, but here I forget what the video was. I was thrown off by the comments because the sister was trying to, in the comments, it must have been a question around Black and Black identity or whatever. And then the sister was like, we should call ourselves Africans instead of Black. And Miss Amanda Seals was like, we are not African. And I'm just like, what is she? And that threw me for a loop, because here this woman is
And
talking
then the
about,
next comment is we're not African, let it go.
yeah, this is well, oh, the next comment underneath that one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And this was when I captured it early. I think I think I had added, so I know I added something after that, and so
Yes.
our likes got up. So that's what was real early, right? So a lot of people agree with her in terms of likes. A lot of people agreed with some of the other people more so than others. But my problem here is that Miss Amanda Seals did not say why she thought that she was an African, or we was an African. She's generalizing and including herself and other people in this, and saying that we aren't African. This African woman, who I don't know where she's from. She probably is from Ohio somewhere. And she says we need to call up Africans instead of Black. And I thought that was a really important statement to make. And in the comments underneath that, there was a struggle that was happening. Man, I did the quote underneath that said, from the chairman, that says, we're not Africa. It's like, you can't get on a boat in Africa and be African and get off in America and be something else. And then like, I didn't get on the boat. That's the wrong Negro. What the hell I mean? We're the same kind of person. So, it's like, and so I think it's really important for, there needs to be a conversation, because here is this woman who's incredibly politically adept. She goes into all of the political issues. And it blew my mind that she, speaking in African accent, when we talk about the Grenadian accent, it's an African accent, and she comes from a place, Grenada, of all places in the Caribbean, who many people can trace their African lineage to the back to slave ships. From when Africans jumped in the water, there's an actual monument in the water. You might have seen it on the coast of Grenada, where there's statues underneath with Africans, mimicking Africans who were enslaved and in chains, who jumped. There's a story about Africans who came to the island, were brought to the island, and then they committed mass suicide and jumped into the water. And
y'all know I always got books around me.
So for her to say that, and then not recognize the political question, the contradiction of her even saying that, I think is divisive, and more than that, she doesn't understand the colonial question. And I think a lot of Black people don't understand the question of domestic colonialism either, because everything that she was talking about, voting rights, all these other kind of things, are stemmed from this question of colonialism and the oppression and exploitation of African people. And for her to say that without an explanation, which just makes it even more like ubiquitous, I thought was a little, disruptive. But that started one of our conversations. What did y'all think about this? I mean, I know that. Go ahead.
I feel like the reason why people don't want to identify as African is, the sense of separation from chattel slavery, really. And there's this great man, I forgot his name, Shahid. He's like an Arab man. He kind of talks like Malcolm X, and he's always quoting Malcolm X. He talks a lot about colonization and imperialism of the U.S. doing it, and he talks about how the U.S. cannot even begin to talk about peace or justice or any of these things until they've repaired what they've done to the Africans that are kidnapped and captive in the U.S. Like, they can't even begin to even touch even come near the concept of peace or justice or democracy until that harm is repaired. And if we forget that we're African, then we forget that where we were stolen from, and we forget that harm of being kidnapped and trafficked across an entire ocean. I saw this tweet the other day, and it was funny because they were like showing the ocean, and it was like, I mean, wild, tankers with giant boxes, those shipping containers falling off and all sorts of stuff, just crazy looking. And the caption was, this just goes to show you how intentional colonization was. Because imagine doing all that on some wooden boat just to take a bunch of people from one continent to the other. And it's so true. That it was a very intentional act. They went through a lot to bring us over here, and they want us to forget it. They want us to forget that we were stolen and all we went through. How many of us didn't even make it here? Millions. The entire route of Atlantic sharks was changed because of the slave trade. Their habitats shifted because their food source shifted because they were throwing so many of us off these boats. And so if we don't remember that we're African, we don't remember any of that. We don't make that connection to our ancestors. And empire benefits from that.
Mhm.
And I've always
Mhm.
seen Amanda Seales as a tool for empire. Yes, she says a few things here and there. She's a liberal, I mean, they sometimes have some good points here
She's
and
a
there, but
She's
liberal.
a liberal.
but
She is liberal.
fundamentally, she's going to do what it takes to serve the empire because she doesn't
Yes.
want to, she doesn't want the society to go away. She just wants a little
Yes.
piece of it. She just wants
Better.
to be a part of it,
Yeah.
and get
Yeah.
like equal benefits or whatever. But some of us want a whole new liberated society because we know
Yes.
that there is no reforming what we're in now. I mean, the basis is genocide and trafficking, and you can't build on a foundation that evil and expect that whatever you create is going to be salvageable.
Snaps and pops. I agree, and that's the best word for her as a liberal, because some of the things that she said about
Mhm.
voting rights and getting people to vote for this party or that parties, really she wants people to vote Democratic, and I said it right, Democratic.
Yeah, you said it
Yeah.
right. Okay, Lisa.
A mistake, but I said it right, y'all. Um, and doing all these other kinds of things. But that, I think, yeah, the things that she does say and the position that she took around Palestine is really important. But still, the position she took around Palestine, she can't even take around herself.
Hmm.
She can't even take around herself as an African person, as a Black person, as she identifies. And I think that that what do you call it when somebody can't see like it's like a split, right? You can't even see the sameness in the thing that you're talking about, which I don't know what the term is. I'm losing it right now, but it's really sad, that the person who attempts to educate and talk to people about oppression, exploitation, and can point it out, and other people can't see the same kinds of conditions that these that we are experiencing. And I think that's really important. Um, and I'm just going to pause for just a second because Jay, I know that you have to jump off soon, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I
So, do you
do.
have anything you want to say before you jump off? I just want to give you, and then me and Coco gonna continue. But yes.
Um, Nothing else really to say. I know I sent you this video earlier of Butch Ware, I think his name is, and he talks about African, or blackness, Africanness as being an oppositional identity to white supremacy, and I feel like that's my hope. I think to some extent it isn't. To some extent it is an identity that is formed not because of white supremacy, but in spite of white supremacy, um, and also at the same time. I feel like part of remembering that I'm African means that I have to reject this empire and
Yes.
can't accept it for what it is, and can't assimilate into it, because assimilation into empire is the destruction of my Africanness.
Yourself. Of yourself.
So I'll
Yes.
leave it at that.
Okay. All right. I just want to also just double tap on that because
Yes.
because I think fundamentally that's what it is for us. I mean, we're an organization, right? But that's fundamentally what it means for us to say, if we recognize that this country, because we live in the United States, was built on the enslavement of Africans, hundreds of years of free labor of enslaved Africans. And I'm not saying about just work. I'm talking about the forced rape and migration of African people, the killing and maiming of African people, the exception, the deaths of African people for the benefit of the people who have oppressed us, white people in this country. Um, that happened over hundreds and hundreds of years. And that the establishment of the United States or the American project was a result of the kidnapping of African people. I think that's one thing. That's the reason why I can't let that go. And then, of course, we live on a colonized, occupied land base in the United States, where other people have been destroyed. Um, by the people who now then call themselves Americans, right? Their foreparents who settled this land and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, so to think, but they committed mass acts of violence, destroyed communities and family ties, and actual people who were more civilized than them, right? Like because one of the things that they do is they call us savages, and that happened in Africa too. That's why this whole rejection of religion and things like that, you know, colonizer religion. People like to decolonize because they brought this thing and then they forced it on you. So all of these things happen. So my identity, my African identity, and reason why I started trying to learn Yoruba and doing learning and studying an African spirituality and maybe even part of the reason why I'm part of the African People's Socialist Party is because it's a rejection of all of that. It's a rejection of this this acceptance that to be a Black person in the United States, that I'm accepting of the title of American or African American or any of those things, but I'm a revolutionary. My goal is to free Africa. The Africa that was destroyed
Okay.
at our expense and still is being destroyed and making it untenable for African people to survive. And my homeland was taken and was ripped away from me. I did not get the benefit of growing up there. I did not get the benefit of being with other African people on the continent, even though there's African people here. We are now divided because of this. And so the recollecting of all of those splits is an African claim, is to be African, is to make that proclamation and work. And not more than it's the proclamation. I feel like you have to do works as well.
All right. And, well, amazing conversation. I have to run. I'll leave you all to it.
All right, Jay. Hope you can continue to tune in or listen. So I want to go back yesterday to the conversation we were having right before this meeting, when we were talking about, because this is what I see a lot of, quote unquote cultural Africans. Well, I shouldn't say cultural Africans, but cultural people or spiritual people, or these woke Black people, I call us Africans, saying, they always want to say we were here, we were already here, and we were already
Columbus.
That's why, again, we were here before Columbus. Our presence is shown. And my response to that is always like, yes, we had open borders. This whole idea of borders is a colonial construct, an imperialist construct. But having you mentioned that it was hundreds. What I based off the estimates I've heard, and it's not just directly in the United States or in the Americas, but who have established, African people who have moved out and have these presences. They're saying there's about 40,000, which during that time was a huge population. If you're looking at primitive, if you're a historian or love history and understand about and sociology and socioeconomics, you know that 40,000 is the equivalent of about 400,000 in today's time. But when people say that in those same circumstances, because I'm able to give them an actual quantitative amount, so that shows that I have some type of understanding of where they're coming from, that you're talking about the difference of 40,000 people compared to the 2 million that were taken out of the continent of Africa. And that estimate is still has been, the 2 million is still considered, even though it's an accepted number, it's still, according to African historians, is still less, greatly underestimated, because on the continent of Africa, they decimated through the stealing and robbing of African people, kidnapping of African people out of the continent of Africa. They demolished tribes. So we have tribes, languages, other cultures that were pretty much, went extinct because of taking of African people out of the continent of Africa. You talk about 22 million compared to 40,000. That means, that just think about it. If I gave you $40,000 over $2 billion, which one are you gonna take? You will take the 2 million. That's because it's a vast amount. Like once you get to the millions, that 40. If I give you 40,000, that's chump change to somebody that has 2 million.
But even with, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No. Go ahead.
No, just even with that assertion that we came before Columbus, which is possibly because African people are geniuses, and we knew how to navigate and do
The
astronomy and do all
stars.
these things,
Yeah.
boat building. I mean, we were the
Columbus
advanced
would have been
society on the
dead.
face of the earth. Okay, so that's definitely real, but that still does not negate the conditions that African people are experiencing right now.
Absolutely. Right now.
I mean, it really does not negate that. Um, and it's not like, because even if African people came before Columbus to the what is now called the Americas, people who were here before the Africans who came before Columbus were also decimated.
Correct.
They were also killed, maimed, colonized, torn apart, ripped to shreds by the Europeans that
Forced
came to this land.
into
Yeah, forced into
enslavement.
forced labor before, like, still. So the question of casting off oppression, it doesn't make, if you're a descendant of those Africans, it doesn't make you an exceptional person. It makes you should be even more more concerned with casting off the vestiges of colonialism, because there is an opportunity here to really showcase what the world could have been like if it wasn't filled with this violence that created these borders that now define Africa and African people. And I mean that not only on the continent of Africa, in the Caribbean and all these other kinds of places, you know and where African people or African descended people are from. So there is, and I'm glad you brought that up, Coco, in terms of like bringing forward these different perspectives that people offer up. And there's another one that's out there too, that we are the I ain't want to say, girl. I'm not even gonna say it. I'm not even gonna put it out there in the
Yeah,
world.
you can. Just do it.
I
Just do
don't
it.
want
Rip
to do
it
it.
off.
I really don't want to, because I feel like that's some metaphysical shit. Like, you know what I mean? So I feel like it's really
Oh,
important
you
for us
talking
to,
about the
like,
religious
yeah. So like I I think that the
girl?
fundamental thing is for us is to claim, not be afraid of it. I think to claim, and I like what Don said. He was just like, when he was younger, he was called an African booty scratcher, and African people, like, just because he was thin and people thought the Africans are starving. And then what he said also was like, Africa, like, I want people to know that Africa is being starved. And that's it. Like, Africa and
Right.
African people are being starved.
Are being
Um,
starved through colonialism.
yeah, there's an image on the internet of Africa, the continent, and it's dug out, and all the minerals are on the side, and
Correct.
Indiana is taking it out. And I don't want to always think about Africa in terms of minerals, because that's essentially, even if there was no minerals in the continent of Africa, right? Still our homeland. We should still want to go back there, right? It's a vast and beautiful continent that is being, and the minerals, the thing is that comes up for us is because those minerals that can be used to improve the conditions and lives of African people, not only on the continent, but around the world,
Hmm.
are being used to destroy people on the continent. So and that's why we call it parasitic capitalism, right? Because in order for us to enjoy, not us, but the colonizer to enjoy, or even us, like here in
Us.
the United
Yeah,
States,
in the
right?
United States.
Streets, lights, all these things, it has to come from somewhere. And that the quality of life for our African brothers and sisters on the continent in many places is not good. And for me being a revolutionary, it's about tying my life not to the fact that I have paved streets, to the lives of those Africans who may be in mines and may have to drop out of school because they need to work, or they are forced to work because of the conditions. Like, that's a rejection. My African identity is claiming that side as opposed to this side, and even the struggles that we make as African people against imperialism, colonialism, all these other kinds of things. And I think it's really important, I'm going to say this, is that we have to start recognizing ourselves as part of that. So when we're in the streets for Palestine, we need to be in the streets for ourselves.
Correct.
in solidarity with what's happening in
In
Palestine, because what's
solidarity.
happening in Palestine is happening to us in the US, happening to us in Africa. These are the things that bring, I know some people don't like to be called oppressed people, but we are oppressed people. And that's not the defining characteristic or identity that we have to hold, because we are also happy people. We're also full of joy. We're also full of perseverance. But the dominating thing is that African people don't have agency. We do not have power anywhere on the face of the planet. And being involved in a not religious organization, political organization that
Mhm.
wants to transform these conditions makes me, in my opinion, more African than most. So, more African than an African on the continent who could speak 5 different languages, who has walked through the African streets,
Throw them out.
who got nappier hair than me. That makes me more African than them too. Shoot, you know what I mean? So like, so these, and so I think that's really important. So I'm gonna hand it over to my camera because I know that we have
Okay.
about
Yep. So we're winding down here, and let me get the script up. Where is it?
You have the slides, camera.
I got the slides ready. I'm trying to get the script up. So we're on our way to the question and answer section. Just making sure I get it. And then, but before then, we're going to go ahead and bring up some announcements. So I just want to say that if you have any comments, because we're on our way to Q&A section, put in your city and your state or country, and then your question, so we can make sure that we represent you accurately as an African from wherever you are. And then we'll go ahead and come back for come back for some question and answer. Look at some of these comments, because there's really some really good comments in here. And let me go ahead and pull up the slideshow.
Camera's doing that. It's already up, so we can.
Okay, y'all see it?
Yeah.
All right. So before wrapping up tonight's program, I hope that you're motivated to contribute to the Mecca for African women in the form of the African Liberation Center. Before closing out, we have some important announcements. Reminder, we have the $250 goal towards phase 2 of the fundraising for the Annual Liberation Center. Now, if you enjoy tonight's program and are inspired and you're motivated, we call on African women worldwide to join the African National Women's Organization. We are the only anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolutionary organization for Black women. Swapping that word again. We have members in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and all around the United States. AMWO is leading on everyday issues concerning African women. We're not just on the internet. We are on the ground in our communities organizing for African liberation. Join the international collective of African women building the revolutionary capacity of African women. To learn more about membership and to join, visit anwohuru.org/join. And here we are. AMWO is the organization of the African poor and working class. So we need you to support to establish the international Mecca for African women. We're calling on members, followers, viewers, and anyone else that unites with establishing a working class embassy, a hub for community empowerment, and a testament to the resilience of African people. Don't wait till the program ends. Pledge your support now. Go to anwohuru.org and let's play this quick clip. I know yesterday played part of it already.
We don't have to play it, camera, because I think that we that is, yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Am I still sharing? It doesn't seem like it. I'm so sorry. I hit the wrong button. All right. So yes, I understand not playing the video because we just played a portion of it. So moving into our next bit, well, I do want to say this. Consider becoming a sustaining donor with donorship levels beginning at just $5 a month. We welcome one-time donations of any amount Every dollar helps us buy a nail, drywall, flooring, plumbing, to donate anytime, not just during this program. Go to annualohuru.org/donate. And if you're in the St. Louis area and can donate your skills, please reach out to info@annualohuru.org because we got a lot of work to do. Wear your politics with Annual. Annual's shop features t-shirts, sweatshirts, travel bags, mugs, hoodies, and even socks. So make sure I got the bag, everything here. Everything is like right here to me today. And also become a decolonizer. We call our distributors and our customers the decolonize hair and body decolonizers. Decolonize hair and body are natural personal care products that highlight ingredients and traditional practices used by indigenous people around the world, in addition to featuring images and quotes of African revolutionaries. They are good. From our butters and conditioners to oils, Decolonize has you covered from head to toe. Make sure your next purchase of skincare products are from us at decolonize.com. So the verdict is in. Uhuru 3 were found not guilty of being Russian agents. They were sorry, I'm having a brain glitch here. They were found guilty of conspiracy,
Or wrongfully convicted of
wrongfully convicted of conspiracy. I shouldn't say found guilty, but wrongfully convicted of conspiracy. Yeah, I I agree with that. We are planning the next phase of the hands off Uhuru because we will appeal. This is just been a defamation of not only the Uhuru 3, but the entire Uhuru movement and what we're here for and who we serve. We are served for African people. Go ahead, Yejide. You have more info.
Yes. So I've been in plenty of meetings, and so one of the things that we're doing early is that we have a Black is Back march, Black People's March in the White House that's going to be in support of the Uhuru 3. And that will be on November 2nd. So we are calling on our comrades, our people, our supporters to join us in Washington, D.C. for that march on the White House on November. There will be some other webinars that are coming out to talk more about the verdict and what's being expected. But the expectation is that there also sentencing that's happening in the end of November. The expectation is that we're not not going to get any jail time, and we have some calls that we're going to be putting out to our contacts around what you can do in this time. There's going to be a letter writing campaign and some other kinds of things that we'll use to improve the situation with to support the Uhuru 3 before sentencing. So that's all I wanted to add.
Uhuru. Yeah, you have more info than I have because you have been in all those meetings. Now, if you enjoyed tonight's program and would like to help us produce shows in the year 2024 and going forward into 2025, I can't believe I started to do the planning for Harry's Daughter Book Club into 2025. Consider volunteering with us. And was looking for interpreters, video editors, chat moderators for our broadcasts and our programs. If you're interested, email us at info@anwohuru.org to share your skills. So next we have One Nation, One Africa Farmers Market in St. Louis. Our next market is going to be this upcoming Saturday, the 21st. If you're interested in becoming a vendor, go to oneafricamarket.com/vendors because we're still open to vendors. Also, if you are in the St. Louis area and want to volunteer your time as a volunteer to help us set up and run the market, reach out to, you can go into oneafricamarket.com/volunteer. Study, fast, train, fight with AMWO LA Tuesdays and Thursdays morning. Register at anwohuru.org/events. And then lastly, a Harriet's Daughter Book Club and Study Group is a monthly virtual discussion that centers around African liberation related literature. Our October book of the month is Organized Fight Win, Black Community Communist Women's Political Writing, edited by Cherise Burden Stelly. Organized Fight Win brings together 3 decades of Black communist women's political writings. In doing so, it highlights the link between communism and Black liberation. The next discussion will be on October 8th, 2024 at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and is open to African women, femmes, and those who are in solidarity with AMWO. Visit amwoohuru.org/events to stay up to date on all upcoming international, national, regional, and local events and programs. Uhuru. I feel like these announcements, I guess, is a testament to all that we do. They get longer and longer. You're on mute, comrade.
That's good. That's what the party wants us to be busy. Yes. I need to be working toward our liberation at all times. So I didn't start any comments. I think we were kind of like responding to comments as they came in. But this was one of those programs that I knew that we would get at least people viewing, which we did, and then we got some observations. This one person had said they wish that they could be calling in to this program. But I think
almost alkaline.
Yeah, so if you can, if people want to still contribute, they can in terms of the conversation that you heard so far. And this really isn't, in my view, I didn't want to have, we did kind of have like this cultural identity sort of conversation and tying it to ourselves phenotypically and, what makes us similar in terms of those things. But ideally what I want to get across is that to be African is a political statement. If for nothing else, to be African means that it's political, number one, because if you say that you're African, I would think that you have an understanding of, if you live in the United States, that you have an understanding about the colonial contradiction that we are experiencing here. Because if you're something else, if you're an African American or if you're just Black, then you don't really, in my view, get to really take in those political things on a daily basis. But if you're African, that means you're from somewhere else. And you're here because of something, and always brings up. And even if you didn't come across during the kidnapping, you're here because your parents immigrated here because you want you to have a better life. Even that is a result of colonialism, right? Because you don't have it there. Come here. You're chasing your resources.
The new diaspora.
Yes, because you don't have education and opportunity on the African continent where everything that we are experiencing here comes from is because we are chasing our own resources. So even if you are newly immigrated to the United States, Europe, which are the two places that people in the world go to when they want to seek a better life, chasing your own resources. That's the reason why you're there, which is a result of colonialism. So to say that we are African, I am African. You can call yourself whatever you want to. You can still be Black and still fight for Africa, right? Like to say I'm African is a recognition that they know that I am here as a result of colonialism. That my Africa and my African people are experiencing deeper, profound contradictions, violence because of imperialism. And me identifying as an African person, other than the fact that I'm phenotypically African, is a statement of that. It's a political statement. And that I am actively working within organizations to overturn or expose those contradictions to our people. And even people who come into AMWO, I don't necessarily have to identify as African. We've had African Americans in AMWO, we've had Black people in AMWO, but the political underside of that, the political position of AMWO is that we are anti-imperialist, we are anti-colonial, and you can be all those things in the organization, but the organizers are African, right? Did you want to say something?
No, I mean you hit the nail. Only thing I would add would be it's something I was thinking about. With bringing up the whole. We were just talking about exactly. We were talking about. You were just mentioning the people that's coming out. The second what is being called the new diaspora. When I read these research papers in the middle of the night, people are saying that leaving to get your education in Europe or in the United States, or even now more commonly in Asian countries, that is still parasitic, because you're taking your intellect, you're taking your skills, and you're going to use it ultimately against your own people in the form of working for a colonizer job. So like even this whole new diaspora, and people are feeling less and less connected to chattel slavery, and which I totally understand based off time. But ultimately, if you can't work, if you are African, you can't work in where you are, and you have to take your skills, that is just a new form of colonial servitude, because you going into these other countries. Like I meet in my day job. I met an African woman who was from the continent of Africa, and she had nothing good to say about Africa, nothing good to say. She's like, but I can come here and get this, and that. I said, but if you had the same opportunities in the continent of Africa, you wouldn't have to leave your family. You wouldn't have to leave to find what you consider is a better life. But even in the construct of what American life is, you're still, you're still not where you're never going to be Jay-Z and Beyonce.
I was just putting up on the screen a comment by Pass Fruit Vitix. And I think this is like the came before Columbus narrative that they are putting out. I think it would be really important. I see that the question he's asked is, if Africa, first of all, they say, I don't know if it's a male or female, Africa is a continent, not a nation or ethnicity. They go on to say that what if the mystery narrative that you have been told is not correct? Because some of our ancestors have been here as a result, not as a result of slavery and European colonialism. Right, I don't care.
Some.
I don't care either way. I don't.
Either way.
To me, the commonality here in the political land. I mean, if you're just a historian and you don't want to be associated, or you proven that you're not associated with the transatlantic kidnapping of African people, then that's okay. Even if I proven that I have been descended of people who were enslaved by that's okay too. The ultimate question for me now today in 2024 is what, and what are we fighting for? Are we fighting to get back to the place, the 1300s, 1300 and something, for African people to live amongst indigenous people who were also wiped out by the colonizers when they arrived on these coasts? For ultimately what I'm saying is that, and what we all should be saying is so
what?
I don't. It's like, so
I mean, that doesn't make them not African because they sailed to Cuba.
That part too.
I mean,
what's the point? What's the point?
Right. What's the point?
Is the point that we shouldn't be calling out African because some Africans sailed to the Americas, the so-called Americas, hundreds of years before the Chilean slavery started? In which case we would still be African? Or should we not be calling ourselves African, or not identifying or claiming Africa? Because the point is that Africa is not a country. In my view, it could be. The United States is a country, right? So why can't Africa be a country? It's a continent. It's not a nation. That's one piece is why we say that it's divisive, because you don't claim Africa as yours. And then now this piece comes in saying that Africans sailed here in 1300s, which means that they are still African. and then now they're something else because they were here before the enslavement of African people began. So
Does that not make them Africans because they were here before?
yeah. So the points that they're making, I don't it's a historical
identity.
perspective. It's a historical perspective, and it's
Mhm.
that really ties people into what history and I totally can unite that those things happened, right? They could have happened. I don't care. The thing that today, African people, the same ones that sailed here in 1300s, are experiencing exploitation, colonialism, enslavement still. We don't have our Africa, and we don't have anything. We don't have power anywhere on the planet. So when we engage in these conversations about Africa and African people, these are the things that we are highlighting.
I disagree. If you highlight this comment here, it says if you want to fight a claim of reparation, we must reestablish a proper identity in law. That is incorrect. That is incorrect.
Why? Say why.
The reason why I say because first of all, the probability very few people are going to be able to draw the line from slavery until today for the simple fact of record keeping. We were commodities. You don't know birth of the cow was from a certain farm to pay for that cow. You know, if cows were taken from off a farm, you don't know if the cow outside of physically marking your cattle, you don't know that that Sarah the cow is that cattle because all the person has on their register is I have 3,000 cows. Very rarely where we.
If African people don't have a nation, who's establishing a proper identity law? Are we leaving as a colonizer to establish this law? So we don't. So without fighting for Africa, without establishing our own government, without taking power back, who is doing these things, and are we doing them within the construct of a colonial border and a colonial land? Like these are the things, right? So
And our African identity, our identity is African.
So this sounds like something like
that's our okay. And we got to wrap. We're over time as well.
We want to thank everybody for tuning in, for contributing to the Q&A, for presenting Past Fruit. I can't say it.
Yeah.
Past Fruit VIC for presenting an opinion that might diverge slightly. And for people for watching us, and remember to like and share, and please consider donating to that.
Let's get to 500.
Let's get to 500. We are a new channel on YouTube. We need to get to 500 in order to make some additional dough. So let's get to that. So like and share our content. And tune in next month. Well, when we have 2 more live streams for you. Yes. Have a good day. Uhuru. We are winning.
Uhuru means freedom.